Okay, hi, I'm Carolyn Lovewell, and this is
Layla Matthews.
And you are listening to the Sleep Over podcast. I am live with Layla and many of our other friends here in Miami. We are hanging out the day before the second immersion of our third cohort of Sleep Over Mystery School. And I've just been sharing with everybody my big enthusiasm for the unsung hermetic genius Stan Tenen, who has this book called The Alphabet That Changed the World. But I think the first things that turned me on to him, David shared with me, which was called The Alphabet in Our Hands. And I find it challenging to sum it up, but I'll give it a stab, which is basically Stan Tenen was raised a secular Jew, not super religious. He was an engineer. And he picked up Genesis one day. Oh, baby Solomon's also here with us. He picked up Genesis one day and was just looking at the text of Genesis, the first verse in Hebrew. And he didn't speak or read Hebrew, but he knew the Hebrew letters from his early education. And he was very good at spotting patterns. And he just saw that there was an interesting pattern to the letters in the first verse of Genesis. And he started playing with it. And he found that one could make this toroidal form using the symmetry of the letters. And that this toroidal form is this special...
Say, for the sake of the story, that you can listen to him explain it. He has all these videos online from his thing, the Meru Foundation. He's no longer alive, bless him. But he didn't just figure out that it made this toroidal shape. He is a mathematical genius by trade, and he obsessively studied and analyzed the mathematical patterns in Genesis for years, and would have an insight and then just experiment for years fruitlessly and then have another insight.
No, the realization of the toroidal form came very early in his work on it, yes.
With the hands.
And then that prompted the interest in the rest of it and the deeper study of
Okay,
it.
well, I'm remembering some of it out of order, but he did, over a process of a really long time and many years, put all of this together. It didn't, just because it's so in-depth and thorough and not... I would say it has the precision of there's nothing is out of place. It's exact whenever you look at this system.
That's true, but I'm just trying to let people know the basics of what it is.
Okay.
So the basics of what it is there's this toroidal form, and when one takes a section of the toroidal form, it's what he calls a model human hand. It's the stylized version of a hand. Which has, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but it's this asymmetrical form that has this little sort of curving flame part that goes around the thumb, and then this arch that goes around the palm of the hand and the fingers. And when one moves this form through a series of different angles, it forms, the shadows that it forms are the Hebrew letters of a certain script. And he also makes the case that the same form at slightly different angles will yield the Arabic alphabet, and the same form doubled up will yield the Greek alphabet, all of which are, considered sacred alphabets. And he finds this really deep way in which there's this, how do I explain? There's a recursive pattern. So the letters generate the toroid that generates the letters, and that itself is this metaphor for seed. Oh, the baby just turned on the TV. He likes to play with the remote. Hold on. Yeah, it's really loud. Okay, there we go. It's this recursive... now I barely know what I'm saying, but it generates the letters. The seed... What is the phrase? The fruit-bearing...
Well, the seed phrase, the first verse of Genesis, can be translated in many ways, but roughly translated, in the beginning creates Elohim, the essence of the heavens and the essence of the earth.
Yes, but
and
hold on, wait, one second. But there's a quote from the Zohar about the fruit that bears the seed,
right?
The tree
and so
itself.
yeah.
God damn it, Layla! One Hebrew verse at a time.
Well, so the Zohar thing
read the Zohar
the
phrase.
Fruit tree yielding fruit whose seed is in itself. the phrase that I read first, in the beginning creates Elohim, the essence of the heavens and the essence of the earth, when written out in the original Hebrew, is itself the seed which generates itself. Like that
it generates
verse,
the fruit of the apple-shaped torus.
Yes. It's very fractal, because it's like a description of what it's doing verbally in translation, but also geometrically and alphabetically is the shape of the universe that it is describing having created.
Yeah, so see, I'm trying to make Layla explain this to me, because Layla, like Stan Tenen, has an engineering education and understands geometry and math. And there's this deep way, so like Stan Tenen is connecting this with the work of Arthur Young, I keep saying Jung, but it's Arthur Young, and this Arthur Young's work on, I think it's called the self-reflexive universe, but it's also all about these processes, these toroidal 7-stage processes. And anyways, he just really brilliantly connects, there's this deep linguistic theory in here too, because the linguistic theory is that the Hebrew letter, so basically modern linguistics, I'm pretty sure, the last I heard, has this whole argument about how like signs are arbitrary, and Stan Tenen's work sort of really opposes that, because he shows the way that the alphabet is formed from gestures, from these meaningful gestures, and that there's this sort of shared resonance of these gestures across, the Hebrew, Greek, Arabic alphabets. And of course, the English alphabet evolved out of the Latin, which itself evolved in relationship with Hebrew and Greek. So there's this deep way in which English, so like one of the big examples he gives is like the Hebrew letter Beth, which means house, which means, a distinguishing from the inside and outside, which is the first letter of the first verse of Genesis, from which he's deriving this amazing toroid, is like BT in English, Beth, and then Teth, I guess, is the Hebrew letter. And it connotes this containment from inside and outside. So house in Hebrew, Beth, and then in English, we have like the word boot, which is like a house for a foot, and booth, which is like a little marketplace house.
And looks a lot like the letter Beth.
And so he shows the way that like all the Hebrew letters come from these hand gestures made with this idealized asymmetrical toroid shape that describes the mathematical definition of the toroid. And anyways, just that the letters come from gestures. They're not meant originally to represent the phonetic thing, although the phonetic sound somehow gets associated with them. But more primally, they are gestural. And this argument that, human language comes from gestures. So like before we were even forming sounds to go with the gestures. Meaningful sounds. We were pointing.
Making meaningful gestures.
We were making meaningful gestures. So the alphabet records this language of gestures, and in the gestures, miraculously, all as above, so below, to form the miracle of the one thing, we have these hands that match this amazing toroidal shape. Anyways, it's very, like, I'm excited about it because I've had many dreams involving roses and apples, and all of the rose, apple, lily forms are contained within this toroid, fountains, all of these beautiful, poetical, mystical things. Stan Tenen points out how they are in this toroidal, he calls it a geometric metaphor for life, because it's like the seed growing into the tree, which creates the fruit, and again and again. And it somehow spits out this tetrahelix thing that is the DNA molecule, which I don't completely understand, and I want Layla to explain to me. But there's I'm just really fascinated by it, I guess because I've had these dream images having so much emphasis on apples and roses and lilies, and this miraculously is present in these patterns formed by the first verse of Genesis and the Hebrew letters, which are a very important part of Western civilization and the Hermetic Kabbalah, certainly, because all of the Kabbalah paths of the Kabbalah, well, I mean, good God, all of the Kabbalah has to do with Hebrew stuff, and the letters are the paths connecting the Sephirah. And anyways, I just feel like Stan Tenen has gone so much deeper with Kabbalah than, like, anybody else. Like, has, like, gone somehow to the heart of the thing, and just, like, really is leaving in the dust every other... Like, this is so much deeper than gematria, for example.
It seems like he has really grokked yet another... like intermediate level of the fractal, because in Kabbalistic studies there is an emphasis on like studying the alphabet and the paths that they correspond to on the tree of life, but a casual observer or a casual dabbler might be like, okay, but like why would I study the alphabet? And
that's how I've been, and I haven't really until now, because I was just like, well, I don't know why, but go ahead.
And so Stan seems to have grokked at a very deep level, this sort of intermediate and original level at which the alphabet itself is describing the toroidal form of the God being, and therefore the all, because that's one of the sort of like takeaways of this torus metaphor, is that it is like, God is the universe is God. God is a singular point that also emerges into the entirety of the whole thing. And the alphabet itself is made from that shape, that geometrical metaphor. I think that's the thing that I'm like grokking as I'm looking at all of this, is that like the alphabet is another description of the foundational metaphor, which is the seed contained by the fruit that yields the seed. And I'll say it again, the fruit tree yielding fruit whose seed is in itself. The alphabet is also describing that in its shape.
Yeah.
And that is like the foundational shape.
And it's so trippy because, he shows that there's a lot of patterns throughout the Torah, but this first verse of Genesis, the fact that it's a story about apples and it makes this apple shape. Oops, Okay, sorry about that. The smoke alarm was going off in the kitchen as we made breakfast in this Airbnb, but go ahead, Layla. We were talking about the geometric metaphor.
Yeah, and then you were saying that.
Right, the first verse, because it's a story about Adam and Eve eating an apple, and there's a serpent, and there's an apple, and in the toroid, there's the serpent shape, there's an apple shape, there's. It's just like,
right. I mean, it's like there's like many layers. So the meaning of the words are: in the beginning creates Elohim, the essence of the heavens and the essence of the earth. So in the beginning, the essence of everything is created, and the shape that is made when these letters are arranged thusly, or in Stan Tenen's way, are a toroidal shape. And the letters which communicate those words are generated from that same toroidal shape. So like just in this one passage, there's like 3 layers of encoding of the essence of the heavens and the essence of the earth. That like on every level, it is talking about itself in that self-referential Jung way.
Yeah, which is consciousness.
Exactly.
That self-referential, self-reflective thing.
Exactly. And it seems like Stan grasped this and was like, wow. it also seems to me like he's just like, where did this come from? Like, I think that's part of what's like driving him is like, that can't be coincidental. That can't be accidental. Where did this higher intelligence come from to create this like dense packet of meaning that on multiple levels, like on the, you know, on the hermeneutic level of meaning, on the geometric level of the organization of the shapes, and on the like foundational level of like the shapes that the words are communicated through, are all saying the same thing. It's completely self-referential. And I think that, I mean, I'm just guessing that Stan was like, this is extremely important. I need to understand this more.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I agree with him. Like, it's majestic. I mean, like, you know, you read basic books on Kabbalah and they're like, oh, and then memorize the Hebrew letters. And I'm like, well, why the fuck would I do that? I don't know. But this, like, provides a pretty compelling case for why one would want to really get cozy with the Hebrew letters and meditate on them. Because, like you said, there's so many deep self-reflective layers here, and to me, it's something, okay, having had a little bit of experience with angels, just my firsthand experience with angels is they really like things like time loops. They really like, you know, everything that they have to express ultimately is this very loopy thing that really folds in upon itself. So this to me is very plainly, and I feel like a lot of classic mystics would agree with me, the work of angels. Like, there wasn't one human person who was like, you know what I'll do? I'll make up this alphabet and then I'll arrange it this way. And then that, like, this is clearly inspired from the heavens. And that's what makes it, like, exciting, I think, to study and have contact with, is like, this is clearly like a gift of a higher dimensional intelligence. You know, and that's one of the ways that he realized that this was present, is because humans, we were trying to send out this message to space. I forget what it's called, but like the SETI satellite or whatever was trying to beam out a message that would be intelligible to other life forms. And Stan Tenen realized that, you know, there's this message that's beaming across time from the first verse of Genesis in a similar fashion to a message that we're trying to beam out across space, which is like, in order, you know, that whoever has this higher degree of intelligence knows that messages, languages decay, like it's easy for things to get lost. But somehow this tradition has succeeded in preserving this deep textual, geometric, narrative metaphor of creation.
And not just a narrative metaphor, like...
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Textual, geometric, alphabetical, like, it's these, like, various levels of meaning. It's very impressive density of meaning.
Yes.
That's being transmitted.
Yes. Well, and this is reminding me of, one of my favorite stories ever, the story of You, I think it's called, by Ted Chiang. And it's about aliens having an encounter with human beings. And the linguist in that story talks about how you'll never, like, the military in that story becomes very concerned that, like, alien races will have learned too much about us from picking up our, you know, satellite emissions, and they're concerned because they're paranoid, and, you know, that comes from their own projection of what aliens might do with information about humans. But essentially what I'm trying to get at here is that, like, you'll never understand a language that another is speaking without interacting with the being. But this information is the kind of information, this information in the beginning of Genesis, is the kind of information that could be understood by someone who doesn't have direct contact with us, because it is communicating a universal truth that they could also recognize as true, and then therefore begin to make meaning out of, because it's pointing to something universally apprehendable, because it's what's really happening. It is the torus, it is the fruit tree that yields the fruit whose seed is in itself. An intelligent race would be like, Yes, we also know that. It's like a constant. It's like the speed of light, or like the, length of a certain element. Like, it's something infinitely recognizable as true, and then therefore it can become a bridge of understanding between people.
A bridge of understanding between people, and I guess a bridge of understanding between levels of consciousness. So
Right.
like David and I were talking about this the other day. Hold on, honey, I know you have a lot to share. About how, like, in a way, why ponder this stuff? Because one can simply open one's heart in devotion to God and very simpler, observe one's breath. Why get into all this complex stuff? And in a way, it's like, it is the form, it is the soul, like the bridge between, matter and spirit is the soul. And this density of meaning is like that soul level that has a lot to express. And one of the things that Stan Tenen points to is he's saying that this, perhaps the first verse of Genesis, encodes a sort of a dance of consciousness and gesture that, when followed meditatively by contemplating the letters and like the movement, the rotation is meant to induce a shift in consciousness to the higher dimensional consciousness. And that's why it's a sacred text, not just because it tells a mythological story, but because it encodes the dance steps of this mystical experience.
Right, if you were to truly understand it at all levels and contemplate, like Carolyn was describing, how the letters are generated from perceiving this toroidal section from its different perspectives, which is like really what we're all just doing anyway, is perceiving the wholeness from different perspectives. But this is like a very condensed visualization of like what angles to look at as it shifts through space and evolves. That contemplation creates a wholeness that is difficult to obtain just by looking out at the world, because you might not notice the pattern, you might not notice the movement, you might not see it so clearly as if you're like following the instructions of this particular meditation to truly invite yourself to apprehend the one thing in all of its perspectival aspects.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I'm so excited that we have David with us is, part of why, obviously, like I said, he showed me the first video about the alphabet in our hands, which everybody should watch all of Stan Tenen's videos. They should probably watch nothing else. They should really just study these. But David pointed me there because David has spent many years in contemplation of the runes and the Norse tree of life, Yggdrasil, which has these paths, these rune paths connecting its centers of consciousness. And, obviously there's something quite parallel with the Hermetic tree of life and the Hebrew letters, also usually given tarot card attributions to the paths or in recent centuries. And David was suggesting, that I get into this alphabet level meditation, which he has done, and he, part of why we do it is it helps us to form the light body and the body of remembrance around ourselves to generate immortal consciousness. And I guess maybe I'll pass it over to David because he does have such wisdom and experience with this form of meditation, letters.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I was just thinking, listening to Layla talk about that. I never heard the story of you, but that more recent movie, it's called Contact.
That's based
Arrival.
on
Arrival.
that story.
I honestly would recommend anybody who wants to read the story and not watch the movie, because I'm not sure that the people who watched the movie or made the movie actually fully grokked what that story was.
Well, I never read the book, and I think the movie conveyed it very beautifully. And it reminds me of even Slaughterhouse-5. I felt like the movie also ripped off that. So but it conveyed a lot of deeper things, and it's like you were saying, the language or the creation of it being a gift from a higher dimensional intelligence. And I think another way to look at it is that it's the actual presence and body of the higher dimensional being here on our plane. And it's like, why do we think that an alien wouldn't look like this text that persists throughout time unalterably. And he points out, like, if a single letter was changed, the math wouldn't add up.
A jot or a tittle.
Yeah, so it's like an absurd level of preservation was required for that, and it all adds up. But the higher dimensional thing, I just wanted to give more of an image of that. So it's like you have these Hebrew letters, which, if anybody has ever seen the Flatlander drawings, animations, or like the Flatlander book, is a perfect explanation of what's happening here. It's like, if you imagine an apple when you grabbed it and stuck your thumb inside it, and it's like a sheet wrapped up all of your fingers and spiraled around down to the singularity at the core of the apple,
where your thumb is,
where the tip of your thumb is, and those two pieces being the polarity of like the many and the one, and the spiral that connects them together. And if you connect 6 of these together like a puzzle piece, they all form a completion of the apple shape, but our hand represents one of them. So this spirally thing, if you look at, like, if you were to make shadow puppets of it, the 2-dimensional silhouette of this 3-dimensional object is how all of these things that we call letters are revealed. But it's like this 3-dimensional thing is also the silhouette of a higher dimensional object that exists throughout time. And when we perceive it inside of time, it looks like this torus shape.
Yes.
And so by making contact with it, it's like you're becoming it, essentially. If we think of the holy guardian angel and break that down etymologically, it's like holy means wholeness. Like there's nothing that's not it. And angel means messenger. So it's like the message from yourself to yourself about how everything is you. And so this is literally the fruit of that, you know, is how you can consume and become the higher dimensional version of yourself. And yeah, I think it's important within people that are into Hermeticism. I was saying the other day, it's like the LBRP is like a sonnet or a symphony, and people do that without breaking down and even like having learned the alphabet yet, like giving Shakespeare to a baby that hasn't learned how to read yet. It's like still helpful the way that we recognize, like if you play a symphony for a child, it makes them smarter. It's like vibrationally, it has an enhancing effect. But to take the time to learn all of the letters individually and then to put these formulas together and vibrate these holy names is like, wow, a huge difference in the level of epiphany and meaning that can come through to a person. And at the same level of fractal, like the way that works with each of the letters, it's like there's a shape and there's a sound and there's a name, which is like the meaning of that letter. And each of these are like the base of a pyramid. So it looks like a 2-dimensional triangle. But when you hold all of these things and realize that the sound and the name and the shape are all aspects of a singular higher dimensional object that just appears to our senses as separate pieces here in time. But whenever you hold them all together, you can rise up on that plane and receive the higher dimensional essence of each letter as its own manifestation of this thing, because of everything Carolyn and Layla said at the beginning, how it's all the garden of pomegranates, like an infinite fractal of the fruit containing the seed that gives birth to the fruit that contains the seed, and consume ye thereof.
Yeah, what David said. So, I just find it exciting because it is, like I said, inspiring me to do a lot more with meditating on the letters and meditating on the paths of the Tree of Life. And, you know, like David was talking about that, like, threefold meditation on, like, the sound of the letter, the shape of the letter, and, like, the traditional meaning ascribed to the letter. So the shape of the letter Beth, the meaning of house or distinction between inside and outside, and the sound of B, and like just really pondering those simultaneously and going deep into it. And I've just barely begun to do that, and already, you know, having learned having read Stan Tenon's book and watched a lot of his videos, I can, obviously I can't read Hebrew, but I can look at the names, the Hebrew names of God that we use in Hermetic Kabbalah, like, Yod He Vav He. I mean, can't pretend. I mean, that's the great sacred name of God. I can't pretend to understand the full ramifications of that, but I have a little bit more flavor associated with it now, like the Yod, the He, the Yod, the He, like whatever that movement is from the Yod to the He. Like I have that sense of that, just beginning to deepen. And one of the things that I appreciate about this kind of study also is, once I did the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram in a dream. So I was in a dream, I became lucid, and I was like, well, you know what you're supposed to do in lucid dreams is practice magic, so I'm going to do that. So I drew a pentagram, and I chanted Adonai, and the pentagram, like, dissolved into this, like, fast-moving stream of letters and numbers, and then this like void opened up in front of me and I just went into the void. And anyways, like that was very interesting and reflects to me that there's some way in which like the pentagrams, which is the golden mean actually. So actually this does connect up with a lot of what Stan Tenen says, because he gets into talking about how, there's this golden mean relationship in the toroid that obviously is reflected throughout nature and is the pentagram. The star at the center of the apple is the pentagram. Anyhow, I don't know. I don't even know. But there's just this like deep stream of information of letters and numbers flew out of the pentagram in my dream. And anyways, I guess I'm just finding the way in which, it's enjoyable to contemplate this hyperdimensional toroid form and begin to I can see how like what David is saying is true, that like the more that I hold whatever is available of it at this dimension from the letters themselves in my mind, the more it seems to invite in this gnosis, attract this, larger dimensional gnosis. Just like, when one does the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram every day, like making the pentagrams evokes the hexagrams. Like there's this way in which the microcosm anyways I'm saying that like everybody knows that, but the mastery of the microcosm invites the presence of the macrocosm. Yeah,
I mean, I'm really enjoying looking at these diagrams from Jung. Arthur Jung, not Carl Jung, Arthur Jung. That they're these inverted triangles. And on the top, actually at the widest point, it's talking about the point sphere oneness or singularity. So actually at the widest point, it's indicating the singularity, because this is a 2-dimensional drawing of a 3-dimensional shape. And then it emerges as light, which then make particles, which then make atoms, which then make molecules. But it's just like really making me think about, emerging research into, the mechanics of the quantum universe, where thoughts, consciousness, intention impact the molecules and the atoms and the particles and the light. And so even though this is drawn on the page as oh yes, we start way up here at the singularity, one pointedness, and it comes into light, which then forms particles, which then form atoms and form molecules, that actually wraps on itself. And there isn't a actually firm distinction at any point. There's no separation. It's not a V that ends in matter. Matter then hooks back up on the other side toroidally with the singularity consciousness presence that emerged as the light that forms the molecules in the beginning. It is a self-generating, self-perpetuating fruit which yields the seed that is in itself at all levels. And we're just going from the singularity at the core of the apple and then things seem to emerge out of it, which then apprehend, the turning back inward to the singularity, which then emerges other things out of it, like a fountain, in this like spiraling form of emergence and resurgence into the whole.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Exactly.
and I think Stan's work is very cool. And yeah, and I think the point of working with these in this super deep way is to, like Carolyn was saying, like, and David, like, become even more and more aware of and identified with and holding in one's consciousness that motion and that shape and that like hyperdimensionality of like the singularity gives birth to the many, and then the many realize or become aware or just are inherently connected to that singularity and are attracted back into it, and it just goes on and on.
Yeah,
and on.
like I can see the way in which, consciously, intentionally choosing to meditate on these forms opens up that higher level of consciousness, because it is opening up like more and more reflection and attention given to that self-reflexive, recursive movement, which is consciousness. So it's like you're deepening
You're giving your mind more metaphors and a richer, more fleshed out, more accurate map of what your consciousness is, so that you can actually apprehend your own self, i.e. God, more clearly, because otherwise the metaphors that are just available are kind of weird and lame and sketchy. This one seems to be like very deep, very rich, very clear metaphor. So yeah, I mean the mind requires metaphors in order to be able to contemplate anything, and in order to be able to understand anything, it has to be made into a metaphor. And it seems like what Stan has revealed is that like there's just like a deep density of helpful, true metaphor to absorb into one's mind to flesh out understanding.
Yeah, that's why I feel that this, well said, Layla. That's couldn't agree more. And that's why I feel like this is such a hermetic masterpiece that needs to be more widely known and appreciated, because that is, the instruction in the Corpus Hermeticum is to, seek to apprehend God by making oneself, imagining oneself in the likeness of God. And the likeness of God apparently is this
Donut.
Is this amazing donut, apple, rose, field of lilies, fountains that's just, fountaining out life and order. And I think something that's important about this, like part of why it's valuable, you've just explained a whole lot about why it's valuable, but like in here, Stan talks about the, syntropic, or he calls it negentropic, actually, but I'm pretty sure syntropic means the same as the term negentropic, versus entropy, and how, like, the sun's rays at a physical level provide a level of organization, information, and energy that allows, we take in that from the sun, and then we humans are able to be these highly organized forms, and all life on Earth organizes itself with that influx of energy and information from the physical sun. And likewise, the more that we can open our minds to the sun behind the sun, the spiritual light, the spiritual infinite density of information and energy, the more we gain the power to follow our destiny instead of our fate, make choices that aren't just, instinctual animal choices, but are like higher level choices, creative choices, which create, beauty and harmony and good stuff. I'll pass it over to David.
One of my favorite quotes is, Nirvana is time travel. And I think that can be interpreted.
Who said that?
Craig Williams. And, like samsara is this illusion that consciousness is this localized thing. And even they've proven now, like, things can't be both local and what's the other? I don't
Non-local?
know. I don't know. But basically, it's like samsara and suffering is based on being locked in this realm of elusive experiences where we're like, limitation, which is really like the lower animal level of perception and sort of like the plant, but like the flower opening up and like consciousness being the good smell that emits from the flower that's like much less localized than the plant itself. These things are like literally channels of time travel because they exist throughout time in like a diachronic way. So interacting with them creates
What does diachronic mean?
Throughout time.
Oh, okay.
It's like the perpendicular axis to synchronic. Okay. Synchronicity and diachronicity. They need each other. Like diachronicity would be like a time loop of like a week ago and a week today. Synchronicity is like I've risen up and I've seen a shape of meaning to where those 2 points in time were completely interconnected and not actually separate moments in time. So like the synchronicity is the vertical raising that connects the diachronicity of time, and you realize that it's like a symmetrical shape that we just are for some reason think that we're moving through linearly most of the time. But these are vehicles of synchronicity. They're like crystalline pure essence of synchronicity. And if we can remember that and interact with them.
Snort them. No.
Yes. Yes, through our 3-dimensional nostrils, which you can. You just have to hold them in your consciousness and see what happens. I think that, like you said, it feels good. Like there is literally a liberating, enlightening effect that the more that you interact with reality through the medium of this density of meaning, the more that your consciousness is liberated from suffering, and the more that you'll naturally have that effect on others as well. So it's a good idea. And it's not just like Hebrew. I think that, all of the sacred traditional systems of meaning are different angles of the same higher dimensional mystery.
Or else they're full of shit.
It's true.
Well, yeah, I mean, speaking of the tradition, I mean, what I find so fascinating is like clearly what Stan Tenen is outlining is true. Like, this is how the Hebrew letters work. This is how the first verse of Genesis works. It is meant to convey this higher dimensional, trans-temporal knowledge. And yet, so few people, even like, serious religious Jews are like, aware of this precise dimension of it, and because it was lost. And it's interesting, Stan Tenen talks about how like there's this book called the Shefatal, which has apparently never been translated out of Hebrew, but it's this masterpiece of the Renaissance of Kabbalah, and it contains these hand diagrams and these a lot of stuff that corresponds to what he figured out. He found that it was, contained within this Kabbalistic work. And according to him, there were lots of people who studied it and were very familiar with it, but they were killed during the Holocaust. And he calls it, the generic Inquisition, that every once in a while there's just a bunch of people who come through murdering and destroying and trying to and a tradition of knowledge. Anyways, I just find it so remarkable that yet, it resurfaced, it survived somehow, and that there are traditions that convey this knowledge, and sometimes they get lost and have to be found again.
To be remembered.
Have to be remembered, yeah. And so this process of remembering and recollection and yeah, just putting together this rich density of meaning, I guess I come to appreciate more and more, why the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was like memorized. Like Crowley makes fun of how like he was sworn into the Golden Dawn at the point of all these threatening oaths, like if you violate these secrets, we'll torture you forever. And he was like, and then they entrusted me with the Hebrew alphabet, which is, clearly a widely known thing. But yeah, they still entrusted you with the secrets of the universe because the Hebrew alphabet is one of these sacred alphabets that encodes this deep movement. So anyways, I just find it really fascinating, and I hope that people do the research to find, the ways that Sanskrit or Japanese or whatever these other deep alphabets encode language, encode this higher dimensional understanding. I remember, David, you were studying a book, was it the Kukai stuff with like the hand movements and the Japanese alphabet? Anyways, I don't know, but there's clearly analogous things in Buddhism, like they meditate on like the Tibetan letter A, and obviously it goes deep, but I just have a new enthusiasm and appreciation for the alphabet level of magic and meaning. So thank you guys for coming together to share that with me, with our listeners this morning. Maybe while we're all together in Miami, I hope we get a chance to record some more fun podcast stuff. I hear that Neil really wants to talk about Tucker Carlson and aliens.
And what's her name? The woman who wrote the book about the deep state?
Whitney Webb. So I go around evangelizing Whitney Webb, and Neil is one of the only people who listens to me. People listen to me. Neil actually went ahead and started diving into Whitney Webb's book on One Nation Under Blackmail, and he was doing a good job of summarizing that book because it's a dense. So anyways, we'll hit Neil up about his realizations of the Whitney Webb rabbit hole and his appreciation for Tucker Carlson's understanding of magical alien warfare. So you have all of that to look forward to. Cliffhanger. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. Remember to like and subscribe and share and, enjoy contemplating Hermetic truth. All right, bye-bye.